Hi, everybody. Just going to wait and wait for some comments to see if this is going live. It's only my second time, so just want to make sure that that everything's working and functioning okay. So just let me know in the comments section if we're actually on and streaming or if nothing's happening. I'm just going to type in the comments. See if anybody can chime in. It looks like we're right at 11:30 in 1 second. I know you're not supposed to start this way, but just want to know if people can see and can see that I'm live. It says people are still waiting. So, oh, okay, awesome. So we are live. So it looks like it's working. This restream tool is really cool, but sometimes I just get nervous that it's not happening. It's really hard to double check on YouTube. So as people are coming into the live, let's talk about the latest and greatest and kind of what's happening in the world of interviewing now. And obviously, with everything that's happening right now, it looks like for the foreseeable future, we are going to be sitting and remaining in this virtual, whether it's initial interviews or it's going to be virtual on-site interviews. And so, I get a lot of comments and a lot of people asking questions about what's this landscape looking like and how do we adapt to the new normal? And so the number one item I want you to be thinking about as you're thinking about just getting prepared and coming in and getting ready for virtual on-sites is really having this positive outlook and positive attitude. You don't have to commute to the job or the job interview. You can have notes below you. You can buy a whiteboard and have it behind you. So there's all sorts of benefits to the virtual on-site. So I'm just going to start posting things as they come in, and I'll keep talking through these virtual on-sites or virtual interviews. Yes, absolutely. This is all going to be recorded and published. So for anybody who can't hang out for the whole time, hey, this will be up on my YouTube channel. I obviously love for you to hang out as long as you want. But you can go back and I will actually pin and timestamp all the questions so you can see how the questions pertain to what really interests you. I just updated the last live this morning, but I will be much more active in updating this one. So if you can't have a question asked to work, do whatever you need to do. And then absolutely, this will be up on the YouTube platform, which is definitely like just one of the huge benefits of YouTube Live is that it stays out there for you. Okay. Let's dive into our first question. I'm going to pin every question up. With Restream, just one thing to keep in mind is sometimes the question will be cut off. So if the question is cut off, I'll restate it. I'm going to restate the question anyway. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of doing that. How do you start interview preparation? Okay, fantastic question. And we could spend a ton of time on this topic. One of the most important things to be thinking about is just two real basic items. I want you to start, a great way to start is by getting your behavioral answers down on paper. And one of the biggest things that I like to think about when I think about these behavioral answers is I really like to think about this concept of bullets. Because what bullets do when we create our behavioral answers and start with our interview prep is they get us a little bit away from telling this really long-winded story, and they help us focus more on the doing actions. And when we talk about doing actions, that's just what I like to call basically the meat or the veggies of the sandwich. It's the big item in the middle, and that's where you're going to spend most of your time to start on your interview prep, specifically with your behavioral answers. You're just going to start typing through all the actions you took, and then the secondary step with your behavioral answers is you're going to go ahead and fill in, well, what was the situation? Think with the situation extremely simplistic. The best analogy that I'd like to give, and I do give to all my clients, is think Disney movie. With that situation, what was your role? the role within the company, your company, and if your company needs any clarification. Like if there's any chance I haven't heard of your company, just tell me a little bit more background. It's really, really helpful. And then lastly, with results as you're prepping on these behavioral answers, really think about not only what was the result of this specific question, but what was the leverage point? This is the visual I like to create. So the visual I like to create is we start with the impact and the one result, but think about the extending impact, the extending results. That's going to be really, really helpful as you think about prepping these behavioral examples too. When I speak to clients, what's always most impressive is not what they did that first time, that first result. It's cool, but the bigger results, so that typically shows up client wins yielding 60 million instead of just that. Get those behavioral answers down on paper. I have a doc that you can download off of practiceinterviews.com to help you with that. Secondarily, and specifically when we're talking about the Googles of the world, but definitely Apple, Facebook, Amazon tends to be mostly a behavioral shop. But when we talk about these companies, the second way I want you to prep is to start creating frameworks. And so what does that mean, creating frameworks? It just means what are the most simplistic concepts that we do in our day-to-day job and the job that we're going to interview for? How do we pull those concepts out and create mini frameworks? Because these mini frameworks, they're just going to keep us really organized with open-ended questions. So really set up those behavioral answers, set up your open-ended frameworks, think rudimentary. It's really a ground layer. It's a place to start. And then obviously that third tiered item is really digging in, spending a lot of time in the job description, researching the company, really just kind of getting a feel for the organization. And obviously we're so lucky now with all the online resources for any company. We can find out a lot of information just utilizing their website, social media, etc. So 3 items: behavioral, rudimentary, framework, rudimentary, and then some of that basic research and going through the job description. I hope this helps. I think that's a really, really good place to start. It can be really intimidating. So just take baby steps, and best advice is start chopping at it maybe half hour a day as you're starting to think about interviewing. Once you get into the interview phase, it's going to take more time. Okay. So this question is going to get cut off, so I'm going to read through the whole item. After phone screening, next video interview is scheduled before the virtual onsite, and the hiring manager of the video interview is from a different department. Should the coverage be more related to behavioral? It depends. So hiring manager on the video interview is from a different department. It could be behavioral. It could be open-ended. They might want to just test your generic collaborative thought process, like how you collaborate across teams, how you work with other teams, how you work externally. But yeah, of course, that behavioral component, and this really depends on the organization, but that behavioral component is always going to come up and always going to be critical. And the behavioral answers, they're just something that I want everybody to constantly be working on all the time. If you're even thinking about interviewing, it's such a valuable exercise. And I can tell you right now, if I had to go back and work on my behavioral examples, it would take some time because it's been a while since I've done it. So yes, I think when we think about these collaborative interviews, I definitely want you to think about both sides of the coin. It could be both behavioral, it could be open-ended. And my last comment on this question would be, just think about how that person, if you know what team they sit on, be thinking about how is your role going to specifically interact with that team? Because if you're thinking about that, you're thinking about how to problem solve and really help that part of the organization. Just some things to think about. I hope that helps. Okay, next question. Do you plan on any videos for product management interviews at Google. So yes, I have worked on one for a while, and I've done a lot of back and forth. I've done a lot of editing. Um, one of the items that I really try to focus on um, in my videos is I want to make sure that I'm bringing the right level of expertise. And so I never hired product managers, and so I do think there are other really good resources. I really like a channel called Exponent. If you haven't seen it, which I'm sure you probably have, he does a lot of good mock interviews on YouTube. But when you think about product management, let's sit and talk about this for a second. There's this whole component of this project program management space that a product manager has to navigate. And then secondarily, how are we adjusting and adapting that framework, the PM 101 framework, to really make sure it works for product managers too? So I think we're still looking at goals and objectives, history, et cetera, et cetera. But then we're getting maybe a little bit more on our frameworks into the testing component, MVPs, and launching. Those are kind of three of the items that would be differentiators for product management. One of the trickiest things, and I can just kind of reference Google, but we'll reference Google and just kind of talk holistically. With product management roles, one of the trickiest pieces is just the complexity of the questions. If you're going in and interviewing for a product management role at Google, for example, go to Glassdoor and look at how crazy those questions are. They seem to be incredibly removed from the position, from the role. It's a lot about app development, creating a brand new app. It could be creating an app for somebody who's visually impaired. It could be creating an app for an amusement park. It definitely could be estimation questions. So the long answer is, yeah, I really want to do this video. I don't see myself as a total expert in the product management space. Of course, when it comes to interviewing, I think all the skills are transferable, but keep pushing me to do it. I've taken a lot of notes. I've prepared a lot to do it. So it's something that I probably should release sometime soon. So thank you so much for that. Okay, next question. This one's going to get cut off, so I'll read it. What types of questions are asked during a Google non-technical PGM position, program manager position? What key points should be included when answering project-based work as a program manager? Okay, so there are a lot of PGM questions, program manager questions, that are non-technical. They're really, really going to focus on how you look at and examine and explore the overall program management space. So that could be looking at roadblocks, looking at risk. A big component is collaboration as well. So those are going to be some of the more non-technical items. And in terms of key points, so what are some key points? So this is where I love the PM 101 framework. I know it's something I talk about a lot, but it's just something I want everybody to think about. So when I think about the key tips or key points, I'm always thinking about goals and objectives, the history, the budget and timeline are going to be critical. I love talking about resourcing and risk, the overall scope and scale. And then one of the biggest ones when you're thinking about a program management role is just really thinking about your stakeholders. How are you working with your stakeholders? You have to lead without authority. You have to navigate a lot of ambiguity. So I hope that helps, but be thinking about holistically, what might you tackle as a program manager? That's going to get away from the technical piece, and then just this overall collaborative space. That's going to be really important too. I hope that helps. Okay, let's see. Next question, again, another longer question. Restream cuts them off, so I'll read them. I recently got phone interviewed by Google. To my surprise, they didn't select me. I was listening to your previous video, followed many instructions, but was not sure the reason to reject me. Okay, this one's tricky, Mandar, because a lot of times you are just not going to get any information or any data from Google. They are going to strongly protect the confidentiality of the interviewer. They're a big company, so there's a lot of legality challenges and issues. The only thing, and my biggest recommendation that I want you to be thinking about is, I just want you to reflect back. I want you to really go through each question that was asked of you. Think about what you did well and maybe a couple of areas where you could have done a little bit better, and take that learning or learnings and apply them in the future. And I know it's really, really tough. I didn't give a lot of feedback when I was a recruiter there either. You always push to get it and you hope that you can get it, but sometimes it's just not there for you. Sorry to hear that it didn't work out. Keep trying. That's my number one recommendation. The vast majority of people I hired there were not interviewing there for the first time. I hope that helps. Okay, next question. Again, it's going to be cut off, so I'll state the whole question. Do you know what makes a team move forward or not after a team match interview? Or alternatively, do you have any advice for team match interviews? Thank you. Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, this team match piece is very tricky, and you are navigating a good deal of ambiguity. So with team match, the number one item that I like to think about when we talk about these team match items is going in with a lot of excitement, a lot of enthusiasm, and a ton of questions. Just a ton. Like, some of these team match conversations will be very dictated by the either woman or man who is the hiring manager and they're running it, or sometimes it will be the exact opposite, and they'll say, what questions do you have for me? The way you always start in these conversations is you start with a lot of questions about them, their background, the team, and it's all positive. What do you like? What do you enjoy? What's the best thing? Because if you start talking in real positive terms and focus on them, it's a great way to start. And then you'll learn more about how you can integrate and have success in the role. When they move forward or don't move forward, again, sometimes we just don't have that data. Sometimes there's just not the connection. Sometimes they're chatting with a lot of people. But this is, if you're at that stage, it's a really, really good stage to be at. So if you can go in really positively and have a lot of questions, those are my two biggest pieces of advice. Good luck. Okay. Next question. Again, it's going to get cut off, so I'll read it. When a recruiter POC has scheduled a call 2 weeks after the final interview to discuss the results of a Google interview, should I view that as a positive or a negative outcome? Recruiter, 2 weeks after the final interview. Okay, yeah, that is really curious. When recruiters take this behavior, just remember, we can't view it positively or negatively because we don't really know that person and what they're thinking. If they're scheduling it 2 weeks out, my only guess and my best guess is that you are potentially a candidate that they're interested in, and they're interviewing other candidates, and they're just holding off to see where you rank against others. Not the best process, don't love it, but that's the only logical reason I can see for doing that. Otherwise, they would want to tell you right away, hey, we're not moving forward. So they're probably doing a little bit of stack ranking. In my opinion, the way I'm hearing it and seeing it, I actually think that this is good news. And the goal is that you just rank better than the others. There's really no other reason that they would wait that long. But really fair to follow up and ask. I think that's a fair question to say. If we're waiting 2 weeks, is it because there are other people in process? Then we're waiting to see how I rank against them. What is the reasoning? Again, it's a very fair question, and I don't see any reason why you couldn't ask it. If a candidate asked me that question, I would be totally cool with it. You are always looking for clarity and information from your recruiters, and sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't, but you always want more information than less information, and I know the waiting is by far the hardest part. So just hang in there, but think about it positively. It will make the time go faster at least. And again, follow up with any questions that you have. All right, next question. Okay. will be appearing for a Google interview for a vendor manager. Any specific topics, books, frameworks you can suggest? Okay, vendor managers. Yes, I'm pretty familiar with these roles. I don't know technically if a vendor manager sits on the program management ladder, but I'm pretty sure that it does. So with vendor managers, this is really, really about internal and external communication. You really want to show your collaboration skills. You're definitely going to get some stakeholder conflict questions. Those could be external stakeholders, internal stakeholders. How do you manage process? How do you manage systems? How do you improve systems? Tell me about a time that you improved a process or a system. So when I think about vendor managers, I just think all collaboration, all process, right? And I think if you can focus on those two items, and then from a book's perspective, no. From a framework's perspective, this is where the PM 101 framework is going to work really, really well. You really want to understand your audience, and in order to understand them, you got to know those things like goals and objectives and history and all that good stuff. And it's just a pause moment. I know I talk a lot about this PM 101 framework, but the PM 101 framework didn't actually come from just program management clients. It came from clients who are engineers, architects, customer engineers, product managers, director level people. They're from interviewing at Google, interviewing at Amazon, interviewing at Facebook. And these were just the generic terms and concepts that came up again and again and again, and just the way I heard them, right? And so even when we talk about something like that shared vision concept, well, with that shared vision concept, that could be about a plan, KPIs, metrics. There could be all different ways that you state that. But if fundamentally we go back to the simplicity of PM 101 framework, I think for a vendor manager, it's going to yield awesome success. I really hope that helps. With books, yeah, there's like a few books. I mean, I love Laszlo's book, and I love Cracking the Code, and those are good books. But really, more like videos, and then more just kind of prep on your own is where I think it's going to be really, really helpful. Hope that helps. Okay. Okay, so does the team match at Google happen after the phone interview or after the on-site? If you are going in for a more generic role, which it sounds like you are, team match only happens for generic roles. It happens after the on-site. And specifically, it can happen in two phases after the on-site. It can happen after your hiring committee approved, or it can happen before hiring committee, and they're really looking for you to get aligned with the hiring manager, who will write a statement of support, and with that statement of support, take the interview feedback to hiring committee. The first item's the better item. For after you get to the on-site, if you really crush those interviews and you are HC approved, just an easier sell for a hiring manager. You've already gotten through a very significant bar of the process. Hiring committee's tough. Not everybody makes it through. And so ideally that's the path. But yeah, with team match, they're not going to talk to you for these more generic roles until you've at least passed all those on-site interviews. And that feedback is looking like, hey, if we put this candidate forward through hiring committee, that they would make it. Hope that helps. Okay, that's next question. Okay, it's a little bit longer, so let me read through it. My career coach advised me to ask questions during an interview and treat it like a back and forth conversation. Is that okay, or should I only ask questions at the end? Yeah, your career coach is spot on. One of the best analogies that I know how to give is put on your meeting hat. What would you do in a meeting? And that could be an internal meeting. That could be going to meet with a customer, for example. You wouldn't just talk and talk and talk and then wait for them to ask a question and then talk and talk and talk. You'd have this extremely good back and forth. And so your career coach is spot on. The check-ins are so critical because if we're just talking and talking and talking, we might have lost our audience a long time ago. But if we keep checking in and clarifying and having a good back and forth, it's going to yield tremendous success. With behavioral answers, the only time you're really checking in is in the beginning. Hey, Jane, it's a great question. Do you want to focus on an internal example or external example? But when it comes to more open-ended questions and more getting to know you, then that's when it's going to really apply back and forth check-ins. And then, of course, questions at the end too. But your career coach is absolutely spot on. And I would follow that exact same advice. So that person's telling you the right things, which is good. Okay. Nick. Oh, Nick, good to hear from you. As someone who has paid for Jeff's one-on-one coaching, I can't say enough great things. If you're on the fence, go for it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. I appreciate the support. And email me. Okay. Okay. Is the PM 101 video available to view on your channel? Yes. I just labeled it the program. It's called Program Management Framework. And maybe that's the right title. Maybe that's actually not the best title, because in reality, again, I think that anybody could use it. And I would use that PM 101 framework now if I went into recruiter interviews, because again, the setup and the organization of it really helps. And so maybe we'll just pause for a second here and talk about the value of a framework. This is something that I've done time and time and time again, but repetition is really important, because the more you hear it, the more likely you are to use frameworks. And the reality is that frameworks do one amazing thing for us. They keep us on task and on point. That is the goal. So, like, for instance, and I talk about this with some of my clients, 2 women from Google created this great video on GCA interviews. And so watch it. If you type in Google interview, there'll be one of the first 5 or 6. I know one of the women, her name is Jody. She's awesome. Really, really succinct and smart. And so they recommend, for open-ended questions, they recommend clarify, hypothesis, solution. And so my switch up is clarify, framework, solution, because what the framework does is it makes sure, again, we're staying really, really organized, we're staying really on point, and we're presenting a hypothesis with a lot of concepts to give Jane, our interviewer, a chance to say, yeah, I really like that path, let's take that path. Or you've just noted to them, hey, I can take all these paths, which are you most interested in? And then you can niche down in the solution if needed, and Jane doesn't give you any feedback. Hope that helps. Program Management Framework. And I will actually pin that with the timestamp to your question in the comments below today as well. Thank you. Okay. Really, really good question, Lavar. Thank you for this. What's the longest you've seen a Google candidate sit in the hiring pool post on-site? A long time. I've seen 6 months, 9 months. Sometimes I've spoken with a couple people who have had up to 8, 9, 10 team fit calls. It's a lot. So it can be a really long time. If you're at this hiring pool post on-site, all I can tell you is you did well. There's a reason why they're kind of holding on you and trying to find the right team and do the right things. So when you get to this stage, all I can tell you is be super proactive as much as you can. Just stay engaged with your recruiter or your point of contact or anybody that you can talk to. You've done things right. And that's where I really want you to sit and focus on. Sometimes this team match stuff, it's not great. It's not ideal. It's not the best process. I really don't like the generic hiring process. I wish everybody could just go through and have a hiring manager match right off the bat. So I've seen long delays of 6+ months. I've definitely seen I think, again, I had a client and they had maybe like, I think it could have been as many as 12 team fit calls. And there was just something going on there with him and with who he was speaking with. So again, just stick in there. I hope that helps. Are you available to coach for mock interviews one-on-one? Yes. For anybody who's interested, and again, this is really about answering your questions, and I'm not here to pitch my services. If you want to book a 10-minute intro call on practiceinterviews.com, you can do that. Thank you so much. What can I prepare for the RRK interview for a customer engineer? Oh my goodness, these customer engineer roles are so fun. This actually happens to be a lot of my clients coming through. A lot are coming through in the sales engineer position for GCP. So for RRK, for any customer engineering facing role, a few things you want to be thinking about. So customer engineers, they need to be technical, they need to have the people skills, you need to be collaborating internally, and you need to be collaborating externally. So think about that time or times where you had really great things happen with a customer. And so this could have been you saw around a corner for maybe a potential technical need that they had. You maybe even had like a little bit of a push and pull with a technical person on the customer side, but you won them over with persistence, showing the value of the technology, and just anytime you've been able to go into a customer and win them over. And then on the internal side, it could be about building and creating great processes, really looking and thinking about the technology and how you can improve how you look at the technology with other team members to make them more successful with their customers and clients as well. I really view these customer engineer roles as all about collaboration. Your ability to interact with people is just going to be critical, and they're fun. Like, they're really fun roles. You have this fantastic skill set of being technical, but also really enjoying talking to people and interacting with people. And so if you can do those both, but this is where a potential collaborative framework might come into play. And so collaborative frameworks typically are listening, questioning, demonstrating empathy, demonstrating understanding. One of the other pieces that's really important too when you just think about a collaborative framework in general is kind of really understanding what does this other person have on their plate. And that goes back to the empathy piece. As I think about collaboration, I'm always saying like, well, why is this person so busy, or why are they not getting back to me, or what's going on? And so I think introducing that piece to really understand what is on your counterpart's plate, for example, can be really helpful. If you have any more follow-up questions, let me know. I love these customer-facing engineering roles. They make up a lot of my clients right now, and they're really fun. Okay. How do you position yourself with no experience? Okay, so sell or position yourself. So this is all about how do you take a little bit of a unique approach and go back to things where they happened in school. There were school projects, maybe at a college or university. Those could be items where you show, hey, if this role is maybe more of an entry-level role and it's really looking for collaboration or it's looking for project management skills, what happened in that school project? This is another time where when you have no experience, you have to get a little bit of creative and talk about maybe something that's more volunteer-based, or it could have been an app you created, or it could have been a course online you created, or it could have been an article you wrote online. So you really just have to stretch the boundaries of what a position or role might be looking for. What are the core skills, key strengths? Do they need in the position? And do you have those? And can you really highlight for your interviewer how you're a match? It's a tricky path. And so with this tricky path, I just want you to reflect back and really look at that job description, go through that process of chopping through it, identifying all those key items, and then correlating it to something that maybe isn't as job specific, but will help you have success in that type of interview. Always a tricky scenario. We all start somewhere and have to work our way up, but I hope that advice helps. It's just a good way to start. Okay, so next question. Looking to go into an entry-level people ops role, but there are mostly tips are online for technical roles. Okay, wow, we're really focused on people skills and collaboration today, which is really, really fun. That's what people ops is. People ops is all about communication, 100%. And so my advice is, again, I know this is going to sound funny, but think about those PM 101 concepts. Like when you're talking and working with people, are you thinking about their goals and objectives? Are you understanding and talking to them about what's worked in the past? Are you talking to them about how they have timeline pressures? What are some other resources you could bring in? What's the risk of not getting this done? Like even in people ops, if we're trying to hire somebody, what's the risk of not having this program manager in place, for example? Or what's the risk of us not improving our process from an HR perspective? And so lastly, you'll get back to kind of more like the overall scope and scale and stakeholders that you'll be working with. Yeah, there's not a lot in the people ops space. It's something that maybe I can work on in the future if people start to push, including yourself. But think collaboration, think communication. Those are the two skills you're really going to want to fall back on time and time again. I hope that helps. Okay. Apple versus Google, engineering program manager, hardware interview. Your insights will your insights still be valid for this specific type of role at Apple? Yep, absolutely. Both of these are fun roles. Obviously, Apple's hardware is cutting edge. You're still going to have, when you think about an eng program manager, you're still going to be having to think about third parties that are working, the third parties and vendors working with the hardware components. So it's just something you'll always have to keep in mind. So it will have this internal, external component. But yeah, Apple's a tough interview, right? They're closer to Google in the sense that they're going to ask behavioral. They're definitely going to ask open-ended questions. One of the things I always think about when I think about Apple is I always think about confidentiality and how they work in silos. So your ability to talk about keeping things close to the cusp and really not sharing too many details. And when you go into your behavioral answers, for example, if there's anything that hedges or seems confidential, leave it out. I know that that's kind of weird, but Apple protects the confidentiality. And I have a lot of friends that work at Apple, and it's really like silo, silo, silo. The teams don't talk to each other because they don't want anything leaking with all their hardware releases, especially the yearly iPhone release. So the differences are not huge. And so let's really go to basics here for a second, because I think it's helpful. If you can do 3 items well, then you can crush any interview for any job at any company. And my top 3, and this is what I talk to with any prospective client, is structure, organization, and level of detail. If you're always going back and thinking about how am I staying structured, how am I staying organized, and am I providing the appropriate amount of detail, not too much, not too little, those 3 items, those 3 factors will absolutely help you have success. Apple or Google, they're both pretty great companies. They have very, very different cultures. Google is very open. Apple is very closed. Both have great earning potential. And obviously, when we talk about hardware, Apple is a world leader in that space. Their hardware is fantastic. So 2 great opportunities. Let me know if you have any more questions. Okay. A position got phased out due to COVID after the RRK interview. GCA and leadership and Googliness interviews didn't happen. Does Google follow up if they decide to start hiring again for this position? Yes, they absolutely will. You are one of many, unfortunately, just based on the current economic landscape. Some roles are being deprioritized to prioritize other roles. And when we talk about prioritizing other roles, specifically in a lot of these companies, we're talking about cloud. So like the influx of GCP clients that I have and AWS clients, I mean, it's like through the roof. This is the major focus of these companies now, to make sure that they're continuing to build the infrastructure and set their clients up for success from an infrastructure perspective. There's really a couple things that you can do. So the number one item you can do is talk to your recruiter about cadence. Just like what's the follow-up, right? Can I follow up once a week, once a month, once every 2 months? Just find out what they're comfortable with, and then literally put it into your calendar and just follow up and follow that regimen. I want them to not forget about you. A lot of times we need to be incredibly proactive with our recruiters. Don't count on them to be great communicators, great at following up. And this is not to knock recruiters. This is all about us taking ownership for us, to own the process, to own the follow-up, to own everything. And so I don't know when the timing of this was and when the role was removed, but what I'm seeing a lot of is that people who are in the interview process, the role is removed and probably being pushed out till next year. And if it's pushed out till next year, then it could actually maybe not be till the spring of next year. Again, it's hard to know role to role, but essentially that's my advice. My advice would be figure out how often you can follow up. And secondarily, another pro tip that I would just recommend for anybody that got put on hold or has been shown interest by any company, if you get to that part of the process, stay incredibly active on their jobs board. So if you're on their jobs board, just be checking on a weekly basis, what's maybe another role or roles that I'm a fit for? And there's a couple of layers of granularity. No new questions are coming in, so I'm going to continue to stick on this topic because it is really helpful and impactful. And so when we think about this, what I want you to think about is a few things. Let's say the recruiter says, reach out once a month. Well, what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify each month maybe 2 or 3 roles that are a potential fit, that they're close with those roles. You want to share the specific job link with them. You want to share 2 or 3 bullets for why you're a fit for the role. And again, just kind of get that sense, get that follow-up of what's best and what are going to be the best next steps. I really hope that helps. It's a tricky time. And so people are definitely being put on hold and you're not alone. But how do you now be really proactive there? Because the proactivity is just, it's key. Like if you don't hear back from your recruiter, you're in the dark. Just never question whether or not you should follow up. If a candidate follows up with me and they're really gracious or kind or really nice, I'm definitely going to get back to them. I'm definitely going to want to be more, I'm going to be more likely to follow up with them because they've been really kind in their notes. They've not said, hey, like what's going on? It's hey, I'm still really excited and enthusiastic about the role. Just checking in to see what's happening next. I hope that helps. So we don't have any new questions coming in. Anybody who's out there who wants to ask a question, please throw something up there. I'm just gonna randomly talk about some subjects that I think will be helpful. And if any new questions come in, I'll cut myself off and I will answer the question right away. But one of the things I want to get back to, which I was talking about really early on in this live session, is the positivity of this virtual landscape that we're living in. And so even as you can see my setup behind me, and you can look behind me, and I wouldn't set it up quite this way, but you can see I have a pretty big wall behind me. the whiteboard. One of the tricky things with virtual right now is that people feel really uncomfortable with a whiteboard, but there's a really good chance that your interviewers are not going to allow you to use an online tool to screen share because they just don't want you getting online. And so I look at this setup back here and I think, wow, if I had a whiteboard up here, how valuable that would be in a virtual interview. I could tell you at Google, in every single one of my interviews where I had an open-ended question, I went right to the whiteboard. I mapped it out. It really helped. I would probably throw my PM 101 framework. Then I'd be mapping arrows to that framework and how that matched to the solution. So like, we don't have to think about this virtual onsite like we can't really get into this bigger physical space where we use a whiteboard. That's one item. Secondarily, I want you to really be thinking about the benefit of not having to commute in, potentially not getting lost, not being stressed, not having an accident on the road, not having a subway breakdown, and just being able to literally pop on your computer. You can use the restroom right away, right beforehand. And it just actually removes some of the stress, even for those people who think they're much better in person. Also, when you think about this virtual on-site or just virtual interviews, you can have notes below you. So as you write out your questions, you can look down and you can have some notes. You can have your frameworks written out with notes. Just remember, less is more. It's going to be really, really important that you're not trying to overdo it or overthink it, right? As you look down, you just might want to see, okay, I want to reference this framework or I want to reference this item. The last piece, and you can see it's been very intentional with my setup that I don't have anything behind me. Not that I want you 100% focused on me, but the light's coming in from outside. And so the lighting on my face is pretty good. And then it's a really clean background. What it does is it just allows everybody your audience to really just kind of focus on you and not be distracted by anything in the background. I keep getting back to this virtual stuff because it's just really, really impactful. Okay, with no additional questions coming in, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and stop the session. I really, really appreciate everybody showing up today. I hope that I provided some really good value. If you have any additional questions, obviously throw them in the comments below. And take care and have a fantastic Wednesday.